The jar sat in the corner of Harold Whitmore's kitchen for 50 years, and nobody paid it any attention. Not his wife Margaret when she wiped down the counters every Sunday. Not his daughter Susan when she visited for coffee. Not the grandkids who raided the cookie jar right next to it. It was just there, a simple glass jar with a metal lid, the kind you'd use for preserves or pickles, sitting on a shelf collecting dust and secrets and something far more valuable than anyone realized. Until the day Harold decided to open it. What happened next? What spilled out onto that kitchen table? It didn't just shock his family. It changed the way they understood their entire lives. And when you hear what was really inside, when you understand what those 50 years of patience actually built, you're going to see your own life differently. Because this isn't a story about money. Not really. It's about what happens when you refuse to believe the lie that small things don't matter. Harold was 73 when this story really begins, though the truth is, it started when he was 23 and nobody was watching. Back then, he was a different person. Young, angry, broke in the way that keeps you up at night counting problems instead of sheep. He worked at a textile mill in North Carolina, the kind of job where you clock in at 6 in the morning and your hands don't stop moving until the whistle blows 8 hours later. The pay was $47 a week. After rent, groceries, and the monthly payment on his beat-up Ford, he had maybe $12 left. $12 to prove he wasn't failing at life. His apartment was a one-bedroom walk-up that smelled like the fried chicken place downstairs. The walls were so thin he could hear his neighbor's radio through the plaster. Harold would sit at his kitchen table, a card table really, with a wobbly leg he'd shimmed with folded newspaws, purr, and he'd stare at his wallet like it might multiply its contents through sheer force of will. It never did. Margaret, his girlfriend then, would visit on Fridays, and she'd pretend not to notice that dinner was always pasta or eggs, nothing fancy, nothing that required much money or hope. "You're going to burn out," she told him once, watching him calculate bills on a scrap of paper. "You can't keep going like this." "Like what?" he'd snapped. "Like I'm trying?" But he knew what she meant. He was trying so hard it was eating him alive, working overtime, skipping meals to save $3, laying awake doing math that never added up to enough. He was drowning in the economics of being young and poor, and the worst part was that everyone around him seemed to be drowning too. His father had died broke. His uncle worked 40 years and retired with nothing but a pension that barely covered rent. Harold was starting to believe that's just how it was. You worked until you couldn't, and then you survived on whatever scraps the world decided you deserved. That's where he was, mentally, when everything broke. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March, the kind that makes your stomach drop before you even answer. Harold's mother, voice shaking, told him his younger brother Thomas had been in an accident. Car wreck on Highway 52. Thomas was alive but banged up, hospital bills piling up, couldn't work for at least 2 months. Their mother was asking each of her sons to help however they could. Harold stared at the phone after she hung up. Help. The word felt like a cruel joke. He had $8.43 in his checking account. $8.43 between him and the idea of being the kind of man who could help his family when it mattered. He sat down at that wobbly card table and put his head in his hands, and for the first time in his adult life, Harold Whitmore cried out of pure, crushing helplessness. "I can't even save my own brother," he said out loud to the empty room. "I can't save anyone." That night, he drove to his grandfather's house. He didn't know why exactly. Maybe because he needed to be around someone who'd survived longer than he had. Maybe because his grandfather's porch light was always on and his door was always unlocked, and sometimes you just need to sit somewhere that feels less like failure. His grandfather didn't look like a wise man. He looked like someone who'd worked with his hands for 60 years and had the scars to prove it. Calluses thick as leather, knuckles that didn't bend quite right anymore. But when Harold walked in, face blotchy from crying, the old man didn't ask questions. He just poured 2 glasses of sweet tea and sat down across from his grandson at the kitchen table. Thomas is hurt, Harold finally said. And I can't help him. I can't help anyone. I'm 23 years old, and I'm completely useless. His grandfather sipped his tea slowly. Then he got up, walked to a cupboard, and pulled down an old glass jar. He set it on the table between them. It was maybe a quarter full of coins and a few crumpled dollar bills. You see this? His grandfather said. Started this jar 40 years ago. Every single day I put something in here. Sometimes it's $1, sometimes it's just the change from my pocket. Some days, the really bad days, it's a nickel. Harold looked at the jar. What's it for? Nothing, his grandfather said. And everything. It's not for emergencies. It's not for bills. It's for the proof. Proof of what? The old man leaned back in his chair. Proof that I kept my word to myself. See, when I was about your age, I was in the same spot you're in now. Broke, scared, felt like I was running in place while the world moved on without me. And I realized something. I'd never kept a promise to myself. Not one. I'd quit everything I started, gave up on everything that got hard. So I made the simplest promise I could think of. I said, every day, I'm going to put something in this jar. Don't matter what else happens. Don't matter if I'm sick or tired or broke. Every day, I keep this one promise. Harold stared at him. That's it? That's your solution? Save nickels? No, his grandfather said firmly. The solution is becoming the kind of man who keeps his word. The money's just the evidence. You want to help your brother? You want to help anyone? First, you've got to prove to yourself that you can do what you say you're going to do. Start small, so small you can't fail. Then do it so long you can't quit. Harold went home that night with his grandfather's words rattling around in his head. He pulled out a glass jar from under his sink, one Margaret had left behind from when she'd made jam last summer, and he stared at it for a long time. Then he opened his wallet, took out a single dollar bill, folded it twice, and dropped it inside. It felt stupid. It felt pointless. $1 wasn't going to change anything. But he did it again the next day, and the day after that. The $1-a-day covenant wasn't complicated, and that's exactly why it worked. Harold created only 3 rules, and he wrote them on a piece of masking tape he stuck to the jar. Rule 1. Every single day, without exception, $1 goes in the jar. Not when you feel like it, not when you remember. Every day. Rule 2. The jar doesn't get opened until you've decided it's time, and you don't decide it's time just because you want something. This isn't a piggy bank. It's a promise. Rule 3. If you break the streak, you start over. The money stays, but the count resets to day 1. The psychology behind it was simple but powerful. It wasn't about the money. It was about identity. Every day Harold put that dollar in the jar, he was telling himself a story. I am the kind of person who keeps his word. When you're broke and scared and convinced you're failing at life, that story is worth more than the dollar. It's proof of concept, evidence that you're not completely out of control. The dollar amount mattered too. It had to be small enough that even on the worst financial day, he could do it. There were days Harold chose the dollar over lunch, days he walked home instead of taking the bus to save the fare, days he felt ridiculous, sacrificing something he needed for something that seemed so insignificant. But that was the point. Small enough that you can't make excuses, consistent enough that it changes who you are. Harold told Margaret about the jar on their 6-month anniversary. They were sitting in his apartment sharing a pizza, and she noticed the jar on the shelf. What's that? A promise, he said. To myself. She picked it up, looked at the bills and coins inside. How long have you been doing this? 183 days. Margaret studied his face. You haven't missed a single day? Not one. She set the jar down carefully. That's actually impressive. It's $1 a day, Marge. It's not impressive. It's barely anything. No, she said quietly. It's 183 promises kept. Most people can't even do that once. The first year, Harold almost quit 17 times. Day 47, he got sick with the flu, fever so high he could barely stand, and he still dragged himself to the jar and dropped in $1 before collapsing back into bed. Day 91, he lost his wallet with the $5 he'd set aside for the week, and he had to scrape together coins from his car's cup holder to make the deposit. Day 212, his transmission died. Repair bill was $300 he didn't have, and he stared at that jar thinking how easy it would be to break it open and at least have something. But he didn't, because by then, it wasn't about money anymore. It was about who he was becoming. He noticed the changes slowly, the way you notice the seasons shifting. He started showing up to work on time, every time. Not because anyone was watching, but because if he could keep the jar promise, he could keep others. He started finishing projects he'd normally abandon halfway through. He volunteered to help his neighbor fix a fence, and when it took 3 weekends instead of 1, he kept coming back. Margaret noticed it too. "You're different," she said one night. "Different how?" "Steadier, like you trust yourself now." She was right. For the first time in his life, Harold trusted his own word. And that changed everything. By year 2, the jar was getting heavy. Harold had to reinforce the shelf it sat on, $730 plus change, just sitting there, proof of 730 consecutive promises kept. His brother Thomas recovered and paid back the family slowly over time. Harold never mentioned that he couldn't help financially. He'd helped in other ways, visiting, running errands, being present. And somehow, that felt like enough. Year 5, Harold married Margaret. At the wedding, his grandfather pulled him aside and asked about the jar. "Still going," Harold said. "Haven't missed a day." The old man's eyes got wet. "That's my boy. You're building something real now." "It's just money," Harold said. "No, it's not," his grandfather replied. "It's proof that you're the kind of man who finishes what he starts. That's rarer than you think." By year 10, Harold had $3,750 in the jar. He and Margaret had bought a small house. He'd been promoted twice at the mill. He had opportunities to break open the jar. A down payment could have been bigger, a car could have been newer. But the jar had become something sacred. It was the physical representation of his commitment to himself, and he protected it the way you protect something holy. His daughter Susan was born in year 12. Harold started a second jar for her that same week, her own $1-a-day future, an inheritance of discipline more than money. When she was old enough to understand, he explained it to her. "Every day, Daddy puts $1 in this jar, every single day, no matter what." "Why?" she asked. "Because I promised myself I would. And keeping promises, especially the ones you make to yourself, that's how you build a life that means something." She didn't understand then, but she would. The decades passed with the strange speed of a life lived fully. Year 20, year 30, year 40. The jar remained untouched on its shelf, growing heavier, more valuable, not because of what was inside it, but because of what it represented. Harold retired from the mill at 67. His grandfather passed away at 91, and at the funeral, Harold's mother pulled him aside. "He told me about your jar," she said. "Said it was the thing he was most proud of, not his own jar, yours. Said you'd become the man he always hoped you'd be." Harold cried then, standing in the funeral home, understanding for the first time what the jar had really been about. It was never about saving money. It was about saving himself from becoming another man who quit on his own potential. When Harold finally opened that jar in front of his family, there was $18,250 in cash inside. 50 years of dollars, stacked and pressed and aged. But that's not why everyone cried. They cried because Harold pulled out a second jar from the cupboard, the one he'd started for Susan the day she was born, $15,230. Then a third jar, one he'd started for his grandson Jake when Jake was struggling with addiction, $1 a day for 7 years, $2,000. $55 waiting for when he got clean. "This is what consistency looks like," Harold said, his voice shaking. "This is what happens when you make a promise to yourself and you keep it, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." His grandson Jake, 3 years sober now, rebuilding his life one day at a time, picked up his jar with trembling hands. "You've been doing this for me for 7 years?" "Every single day," Harold said, "because I believe in the man you're becoming, and because I wanted you to have proof that someone kept faith with you, even when you couldn't keep it with yourself." Susan held her jar, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, It's not the money," Harold interrupted. "It's the promise. It's the proof that small things done consistently build something that matters. This money, you can spend it however you want. But what I really hope you inherit is the habit, the discipline, the understanding that you are capable of keeping your word to yourself." His wife Margaret, sitting beside him, squeezed his hand. She'd watched every single deposit for 50 years. She'd seen him sick, tired, broke, grieving, and haas. He'd never once broken the promise. Not once. "What are you going to do with yours?" Susan asked her father. Harold smiled. "Start over. Tomorrow's day one again." Here's what nobody tells you about discipline. It's not about the money. It's not about the achievement. It's not even about the goal. It's about becoming the kind of person who trusts their own word. Right now, most of you listening to this, you've broken so many promises to yourself that you don't even trust your own commitments anymore. You say you'll start tomorrow, and you don't. You say you'll change, and you stay the same. You say this time will be different, and it never is. That's not a character flaw. That's just what happens when you've never proven to yourself that you can do hard things consistently. Harold's jar worked because it removed every excuse. It was small enough that money couldn't be the reason you failed. It was simple enough that complexity couldn't be the obstacle. It was daily, so you couldn't defer it to later. And it was visible. Sitting on that shelf, it was a daily confrontation with your own integrity. Every time Harold walked into his kitchen, he faced a choice: keep the promise or break it. For 50 years, he chose to keep it. The framework isn't just about money. You could apply this to anything. 1 page written every day, 1 mile walked, 1 call to someone you love, 1 moment of meditation, 1 act of kindness. The content doesn't matter nearly as much as the consistency, because you're not trying to save $18,250 over 50 years. You're trying to save yourself from a life of broken commitments and abandoned potential. Think about it. Where would you be if you'd done something small every single day for the last year? The last 5 years? What would be different if you'd kept 1 simple promise to yourself without exception? You'd be somewhere else entirely. You'd be someone else entirely. The compound effect isn't just about money or skills, it's about identity. Every time you keep a small promise, you're casting a vote for the kind of person you want to become. Every dollar Harold put in that jar was a vote for being someone who finishes what he starts. After 18,250 votes, the election wasn't even close. He'd become that person. Most people never transform because they're waiting for the big moment, the perfect plan, the ideal circumstances. They're waiting to feel motivated or inspired or ready. Harold's jar proves you don't need any of that. You need a jar, a dollar, a promise, and the willingness to show up when it doesn't feel like it matters. Because here's the truth. It won't feel like it matters. Not on day 1, not on day 100, probably not on day 1,000. You'll be tempted to quit because the progress feels invisible. Your brain will tell you it's pointless. People around you might laugh at how small your commitment is. But that's the test. Can you keep going when there's no immediate reward? Can you trust the process when the outcome is years or decades away? Harold could, and it gave him something money can't buy: unshakable self-respect. You want to know what really happened in that kitchen? When Harold opened those jars, His family didn't just see money. They saw proof that transformation is possible. They saw evidence that one person making one small choice every day can create something miraculous over time. Jake looked at his jar and thought, if he could do this for me every single day, I can stay sober one more day. Susan looked at hers and realized her father had been building her future while she wasn't even paying attention. Margaret saw the man she'd married 50 years ago and recognized that he'd become exactly who he'd promised he'd be. That's what consistency does. It doesn't just change your circumstances, it changes who you are, and who you are determines everything else. So here's what I'm asking you to do, and it's going to feel too small to matter. Find a jar. Right now, today, before you talk yourself out of it. It doesn't have to be fancy. Any jar with a lid will work. Then decide on your one thing. Maybe it's $1 a day like Harold. Maybe it's writing one sentence of the book you've been putting off. Maybe it's one push-up, 1 minute of silence, one text to someone who matters. Make it so small you can't fail, so simple you can't get confused. Then write your promise on a piece of tape and stick it to the jar. Make it specific. Every day I will, and fill in the blank. Not I'll try, not I want to, I will. Present tense, definite commitment. Now comes the hard part. Do it. Today, right now, and then tomorrow, and then the day after that. Don't wait for motivation. Don't wait for inspiration. Don't wait until you feel like it. Just do it because you said you would. That's the whole secret. Keep your word to yourself when it's easy, and especially when it's not. Mark your calendar. Track your streak. Let the number of consecutive days become something you're proud of. Let it become part of your identity. I'm someone who keeps this promise. Let that be true even when nothing else feels true. There will be days you don't want to do it. Do it anyway. There will be days you forget. Set a reminder. There will be days you're sick or tired or depressed or convinced it doesn't matter. Those are the most important days. Those are the days when you prove to yourself what you're actually made of. And when people ask what you're doing, because they will, because a jar sitting on your counter invites questions, tell them the truth. I'm keeping a promise to myself. I'm proving I can do hard things. I'm building evidence of my own discipline. Some will understand, some won't. It doesn't matter. This isn't for them. This is for you. Imagine where you'll be in a year if you do this. 365 consecutive promises kept. 365 pieces of evidence that you are becoming someone different. Someone better. Someone who finishes what they start. The jar won't just have money or pages or miles in it. It'll have proof of your transformation. Now imagine 5 years, 10 years, 50 years. Imagine being 73 years old and opening that jar in front of the people you love most and showing them what consistency built. Imagine the conversations that will happen because of what you did day after day, when nobody was watching and nothing was forcing you to continue except your own word. That's the invitation. Not to save money, though you might. Not to write a book or get healthy or build a skill, though you could. The real invitation is to become someone who trusts themselves, someone who keeps their commitments, someone who understands that small things, done with great consistency, create extraordinary lives. Harold Whitmore started with $1 and a broken promise to himself. He ended with a legacy of discipline that changed his entire family tree. His grandson Jake? 3 years after receiving that jar, he started his own, one day sober at a time, marking it with a stone instead of $1. He's at 1,247 days now. Susan started a jar for her daughter. The habit became generational, not because of the money, but because of what it represented. You can start that same legacy today. You're not too late. You're not too broken. You're not too far behind. You're exactly where Harold was when he was 23 and crying at his grandfather's table, at the beginning of something that could change everything if you're willing to start small and stay consistent. Find your jar, make your promise, keep it. Not just today, but tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. Let the streak become sacred. Let the habit become identity. Let the consistency become proof that you are capable of extraordinary things, even when they're built one ordinary day at a time. The jar is waiting. The promise is simple. The question is, will you start?